Okay guys, welcome in. We're going to be talking about drum editing today. We're going to be using a couple different things. The Softube Console One. This is hardware and plugin. We'll be using just the plugin so you can kind of see what I'm doing. This can all be accomplished using stock plugins. And then we're also going to be using Slate Digital Plugins to kind of bring the drums to life. And we'll be using like a two-tiered approach to it. So let's take a listen to the song real quick. I have all my drums recorded right here. Solo them out. So as you can hear, it's not a bad recording. These were recorded right here in my studio, and I'll do another video about what the studio itself looks like. But first things first, we need to kind of go through and label what everything is so that we can keep track of what's what. So I've already labeled the tracks themselves. These are your overheads. I'm going to use the bass in icon and the bass out icon. Snare top, snare bottom. And it may seem kind of, maybe pointless to you, but I like to use these because I like to know what I'm looking at, and I'll show you what this looks like here on the mixer in a second. There's our hi-hat. Okay. All right, and the reason why this is kind of important is when we're using the mixer, if you look right here, you can just kind of see right off the bat what is what. Everything over here is buses and everything else is the rest of the song. This is an instrumental track, so the drums are pretty important to drive the song. Almost, I guess, on any other song too. Okay, so the other thing that I've done here, I've panned things just slightly here. I use the audience perspective when mixing drums. So you have your rack tom here. I have that panned slightly to the right because the rack drum kind of sits right to the right of the drummer. Of the bass drum when you're looking at it. The floor tom is a little bit further out to the left, as well as the hi-hat to the right. So the floor tom and the hi-hat, they're kind of sit in the same space away from the drum. Therefore, that's why I pan them out a little bit further than the rack tom. Okay, cool. So let's get started. So we'll start with the bass drum. Let's unsolo everything else. So we just have the bass drum. Let's take a listen to what that sounds like. So we can hear it a little bit better. So it's got some issues. Let's open up the Softube Console One. We'll do it in mono because this is a one source instrument. You just want this right in the middle of your mix. You don't want this in both speakers. It just needs to sit right down the middle. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to gate it. Come on. And I'm trying to take out as much of the ambient fluff, like that snare noise that we're hearing now. Let's go to the hard gate, see what we got here. Now the key is you don't want to take too much out where you lose everything. So just play with what sounds good to you. We'll add a little bit of sustain, not a lot. The other thing is you want to avoid some popping. You don't want to hear a lot of popping. That sounded pretty good. Let's add a little bit of punch. Now the EQ section of this I'm going to leave alone for right now, but I am going to hit it with a compressor. And this compressor is emulating an SSL. Okay, so what I'm doing, I'm just looking for a little bit of engagement here. Now the drive, this drive function and drive and character are, if this was recorded through a console, how hard will we actually be driving the console itself? So I like to leave this in the 12 o'clock position. The character starts in the 12 o'clock position, and it gets a little bit more muddier as you drag left, a little bit brighter as you drag right. So let's take a listen. Come on. Still not completely happy with this gate. What I don't want is too much of that popping noise. Yeah, so let's take the hard gate off. Get a little bit more natural sounding. Okay, I like that. That's pretty rad. All right, cool. So now where the heavy lifting is going to come in play, let's lower this down so we're not clipping so much, is the next tier of our approach here, and that is going to be using Slate Digital. You can use stock plugins, but Slate Digital stuff is pretty cool, and their presets are just really amazing. Okay, so I'm going to go to drums. Let's try the big rock kick. It's pretty punchy. It's got some plasticky kind of sounds to it. Let's try another preset. Let's see where we're at here. Power kick. That's a little bit more metal-y sounding. Like that'd be great in a metal mix. Now that's got a really good vintagey kind of rumble to it. However, I have a bass out already over here. And so I'm already going to accomplish this sound using that. So let's come back to that power kick. Or was it big rock kick? That was it. Cool. We're just going to pull some of this plasticky sound back a little bit, the beater sound. Cool. Yeah, I kind of dig that. So let's bring in the bass out here. We'll take the bass in out for a second. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to go over to Console One. Softube Console One. Same thing as mono. Alright, here we go with the gate. Come on back. I gotta fix this. There we go. Now you hear this is gonna provide you a lot of your subby kind of bass. It's gonna add a lot of that lower flavor to your bass. You don't want a lot of this in your mix or else it'll just get too muddy and you won't have any attack. But this is a really good starting point. You don't want it to be too punchy either because this is just giving kind of that sub power to your bass. But let's give it a little bit of sustain. Now I'm also going to avoid the compressor or the EQ on this one. We'll go with the compressor. Now again, I'm just looking here. I think we're getting a little too much compression because remember the Slate Digital compressor is also going to be there, so I don't want to compress the life out of this thing. And again, I'm going to bring my drive up, emulate that SSL, pull back some of that character because remember this is more of the muddier or more rumbly side. I kind of dig this sound, so let's check out what these two sound like together. Getting some clippy McClippers in there. So by itself, that's the bass in. Yeah, and there it gives it just a little bit of power, which I'm really liking. Cool. Now we do need to add the Slate Digital mix rack again. Let's go back over to the drum section. I swear I'm not a Slate Digital salesman. I just like a lot of their plugins. I like Waves. I like a lot of different company plugins. But Slate Digital for drums is kind of where it's at for me. Okay, so let's go back to that thick rock kit. I really like that a lot. Okay, let's see what that sounds like. Oh yeah, it brings it forward just a little bit. Okay, I'm in. Cool. Now I'm going to show you one thing, and you should do this for all of these, is create something called a VCA. We want to basically have one fader that can control this once we get it to a sound that we like. So this sound right here, it's pretty strong. I like it. And that's all a taste thing. So there's this thing called a VCA. And if you don't see that, you need to go up to View, come down to Channel Strip Components, and make sure that this is checked right here. So if it's not checked, you see that it just went away. It's no longer here. So go back to your View up here, Channel Strip Components, VCA. Now where this is going to show up, so give me a second here. Let's create a VCA with both of these tracks. Create new VCA. Okay, so it says VCA 1, but I don't see anything. So Logic puts it over here. Now, if you're in Pro Tools, you have to create this on your own, which I'm not a huge fan of, and I love that Logic will create this for you. So let's go ahead and label this. This is bass drum. And then if you want this to come over, you just simply click this power button right here, and bam, it is now sitting right next to it. It has now moved next to our bass drums. And there it is. Now, when I play these, I have complete control over the volume without having to address each fader. Now, that's the only one I'm going to do just so that we save time for VCA, but that's a VCA. Okay, so let's go over the snare. Snare top. Okay, so we definitely have our work cut out for us. But overall, not a bad snare sound. It's definitely workable. This was a pork pie black magic, I believe. It's black something. I don't want to say black beauty because it's not, but it's basically the pork pie version of the black beauty. Now, these were also recorded. The snare itself was recorded with an SM57. Okay, so let's do the shape. Here we go. The bass drum, by the way, was recorded with a Sennheiser E902. So I'm basically just trying to get as much of the ambient stuff out of there. Like, you can hear the bass drum in a little bit. Now, the thing I don't want to do is take out too much of it where it sounds a little too thin. Let's see if I add some sustain, if I can get some of this back. Yeah, not too bad. Let's add a little bit of punch. Okay, now a little bit of compression. I'm, again, going to avoid the CQ because the Slate Digital presets have some really just great EQs. All right, let's see if we increase our threshold here and our ratio. Okay, so I'm just engaging the compressor slightly here, so you'll just see this little red tab shifting. If you actually go to the hardware side of the Softube, it's the Console One. It's much better, but for this purposes, this is just so that you can see what we're doing. Again, I'm going to add that drive, and this time let's move that character over here to the trebly side. Nice. Yeah, I like it. I like it. Cool. Now, that's just step one. Now I know we're clipping here, so let's bring her down. We're going to go back to our old friend Slate Digital. That Steven Slate. Okay. And there's a couple different presets here. You have like classic snares. There's a couple other ones in here. I got a punchy snare. Let's start with the punchy. So you can hear that it's already added quite a bit. Now this is your compressor right here. It does have its own presets as well. I just like to stick with their presets. I got a big snare. Let's see what that sounds like. Not a lot of change. Oops. Let's go over the classic snare. Yeah, that one sounds pretty good. I'm kind of digging that one. Let's try just one more. It's always important to just, this is all taste. Just all taste. Yeah, let's stick with that classic snare one for now. And again, here's your EQ. And this is just adding a little bit of shimmer and increasing the thickness of the snare itself. Okay, I'm liking it. Let's see where we are at level-wise. Yeah, we're still pretty hot there. Okay, cool. All right, let's go over now to the snare bottom. Yikes. There's that nice slappy electric sound of the snare bottom. Now, this was done with an SM58. Now, one thing you got to be really careful before I get into anything, when you are doing the snare bottom, you need to make sure that the phase is correct, because when you have the snare top being mic'd, you have a SM57 basically pointing downwards, and right below it, an SM58 or whatever, SM57 pointing right back up at it. So you need to make sure that you're checking your phase. There's a good stock plugin that comes right with Logic. You just go to Utility, Gain, and there's a thing called Phase Insert. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solo the top and bottom, and we're going to listen to it without the phase invert. All right, now this is on the bottom snare bottom. Keep in mind what this is going to do. So check this out. So you can hear really quickly that the phase invert when engaged is taking a lot of the natural sound out of the snare, and that's not something that you want. The reason why the phase is good is because these drums were recorded through Focusrite ISA 110s or 110s, whatever you want to call them, and I had already flipped the phase on the hardware itself, on the preamps themselves. So there's no need to work with the phase. However, if your snare is just not sounding right, and you've mic'd it on the top and bottom, go ahead and flip that phase. And that goes for almost any instrument. Flip the phase, see if that does anything. Let's listen one more time. This is without it engaged. With engaged. You hear how thin that got? Okay, so enough about phase. Take that console out. Let's go back to our Softube. We're going to go to mono. Oops. Didn't need to do that. Okay, here we go. Now I'm just going to do the same thing. Let's bring our snare top out. So just add a little punch, a little bit of sustain, and then there's that gate to keep all the ambient noise out of it. Let's get some compressing going. There we go. Just engaging a little bit, just touching it. Same thing, drive to 12 o'clock. Let's add a little bit here on our character. All right, sounded pretty good, sounded pretty good. So let's bring this now in with the snare. The snare top. Okay, so that's sounding pretty good. We are still not quite there yet. So what I like to do with the snare bottom is I just go right for a stock compressor. They have a great preset on Logic. It's called Snare Bottom. It's somewhere in here, Rock Snare Bottom. There it is. And it's going to be a Fet compressor, a field effects transistor compressor. Now those, if you're looking at these for the first time, your Fet is basically a version of the old school Universal Audio 1176, and your vintage Opto is kind of like your old school Teletronics LA2A. This is basically a compressor that is driven by light and is great for slower moving transients. Your Fets are kind of like the faster compressors of the famous kind, and they're great for almost anything drum related. Okay, so we're going to go back. Let's just re-engage this. Okay. That's just going to give it that a little bit of texture. Cool. And you can see the compressor working right here. Okay, so what the bottom snare drum is really doing is it's just giving that overall feel to the snare. So it brings in kind of like that realistic sound that you hear, because when you're listening in a room with a snare drum, you're hearing both the top and bottom of it working together. So let's listen just to the top. Now with the bottom. Now, more old school recordings, if you like Earth, Wind and Fire, that song September is a really great example of this. They use a lot of the bottom snare because it adds a lot of electricity. So like older disco music is great to have a lot of that bottom snare. It gives you that like indie snap sound that just cuts through a mix. When you're doing kind of more long-winded rock and roll instrumentals like this one, the top should always be over the bottom. Okay. Now, it still sounds a little garage bandy. So there's one more thing that we can do. I like Waves plugins. So we're going to use Waves. And we're going to use their reverb. You can use any reverb. There's some great reverbs here in Logic. Their Space Designer, I think, is the best thing about Logic. So we could use a lot of stuff in here. Come on. If you go up here to their presets, and you go to medium spaces, where are we at? Plate reverbs, go to the drum plate. It's a really, really good one. I use that a lot too. But if you have Waves, it's pretty awesome. So we're going to go down to Renaissance Verb, our verb. That is right here. And we're going to go to something called gated. This is a gated reverb. And you notice there's like a big orange field here with kind of orangish yellow lines. You want that orange field to stay above it, or else I'll show you what happens. It sounds just really all over the place. So let's listen in on this real quick. Yikes, right? Sounds like, I don't even know what that sounds like. So that's what happens when the orange field gets below kind of your early reference. So let's bring this back up. I want to bring the wet. Actually, we'll leave that there. And let's bring our early reference down. Let's bring the verb up. This is just a way, like, you just got to play with it. A lot goes a long way here, by the way. Okay, now what that's doing is it's really just giving the snare a little bit of help. It's putting it in space. Now, what you got to be careful about. Let's listen one more time. Is if you overuse this, and this goes for any sound source. If you overuse any type of reverb, it doesn't matter if it's gated or hall or plate or whatever. It will sync your sound source into your track almost unrecoverably. It'll take all of its attack away. You'll lose any presence that you've got. So you got to be very, very careful about using this kind of stuff too much. Now, there's ways around it. If you really like the tail of something, a reverb tail of something, there's ways that we can sidechain compress it, which I'll go over in a future video if you guys like. And that can kind of help with that. But it's still, if you use too much reverb, stuff's going to sink into the track. All right, so let's leave that right about there. I only do it on the top snare because if you're throwing reverbs around too much, it just becomes a reverb nightmare. So we're going to leave that there. Okay, I'd normally create a VCA here, but let's just save time and move on to the rack. Well, it helped to have actual rack notes here. There we go. Let's turn this up a little bit. Okay, it's not a bad sound. Okay, so I'm going to hit X to bring my mixer back up. That's what the button X does in Logic. Cool, let's open up our console real quick, and we'll get moving on this one. So, where are we here? Softube Console One. Okay, and we're immediately going to go back to our shape and gate this thing. What I'm trying to do is just get the snare drum as far out as I can without it sounding weird and poppy. That's not too bad. Let's try the compressor here. So we're already working here. Bring the drive up. That's not a bad starting point. So let's see what happens when we add some of that Slate Digital stuff. I promise you I am not a salesman for them. I just really, really like their stuff. Okay. So they've got a great rack tom here. Let's try this one. Sounds pretty good. Now notice that my revival part of this chain is in the red. So I don't like that very much. I don't like going in the red too much. So let's go to trim. Now you can use peaking kind of or clipping as a good saturation tool, but not for this application. This is not what and that's all taste. So I'm just kind of making sure, this is just a basic trimmer tool. I'm just making sure that this revival plugin is hit correctly. Now, this goes for almost any plugin that you're going to use in any session on any DAW. Make sure that you are not hitting it too hard with gain coming in, or else it's just not going to be able to do its job. Nice. That's not a bad sound. Let's go to the floor tom. Cool. All right, so let's go to Softube. Now this is a primary instrument in this section of the song. This is a pre-chorus, and so what you don't want is to hear that clicking. It sounds choppy, so I'm trying to prevent that from happening. I'm also going to take some of the sustain away, because floor toms in general have a really big tendency to take over mixes with how long they take to decay. So sustain for your transient design is kind of a big deal, to take some of that out and then add a little bit of punch. So it may even sound better when you take punch away. However, when you put it with everything else, when it gets into that musical conversation, it's just not going to cut through and it's not going to drive the song like it needs to. So that's why I'm adding punch there. Okay, again, just kissing this compressor. That's a little much. Okay, same thing. Let's drive that SSL. Okay, not a bad place. Now let's go back to our Slate Digital. And I'm going back to the drum preset. I'm going right to my floor tom. So we're back in the red here. Let's quickly add a trim, just like we did before. Cool. Now we're not really hitting this compressor at all, which is okay. Increasing the ratio here. Let's bring her back. There we go. I want some sort of gain. I don't want to completely kill it, but that's good. We're just barely touching it because remember, the two compressors together are doing their job. Yeah, that's not sounding bad. Okay. Now, let's go over to our overheads. These were recorded with a Neumann KM1A4 stereo set. Sorry, I punched the microphone there. This is where we can have a little bit of fun. There's a lot of different ways to treat these in post. I just like we can either use smooth or just go to overheads. I just like to use presets on these. You just don't want them to sound too tingy. If they sound too much on the treble side, they'll really cut through your mix in kind of a negative way. So let's listen to these together. Now, people also always talk about panning with these guys. I like to leave mine right down the center. I don't like to combine them, and I don't like to make them in stereo, meaning put one in the left speaker like this and one in the right. What I think happens when you do that is that's not how you hear a drum set in real life. What you're hearing is the cymbals and the drums kind of all together. You're not hearing one cymbal or one set of cymbals on your left and one set of cymbals on your right. They're all in front of you if you're standing in front of the kit. Therefore, I leave everything cymbal related down the middle. All right, so let's try, or overheads down the middle. I got my hi-hat is pan. Let's see what they sound like. Let's turn off the mix rack. So the mix rack's just giving a little bit of a bump, which I'm kind of digging. Okay, let's leave it there for now. All right, one last thing, the hi-hat. Now, I am going to put an EQ on this hi-hat, but let's do that in a second. I'd like to actually use the full signal of the hi-hat hitting the plugin, the Slate Digital Mix Rack, one more time. And they've got a couple different versions of hi-hats. They've got warm hi-hat 1, warm hi-hat 2. Warm hi-hat 1 for the set of Sabian AAX hi-hats always just seems to work for me. So we're just going to use warm hi-hat 1. These were recorded on an Audio Technica 4040. Definitely try to record a hi-hat on an SM57. All my recording buddies do it, and they get really great results. I only have one SM57 and one SM58. The rest is a bunch of condenser mics, so I need to get that. But that's why I haven't tried that yet. Okay, now that is hitting the plugin first, I want to EQ it after, and I'm just going to remove everything below 500 hertz. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because a lot of the heavy lifting with the hi-hats and the cymbals is already being taken care of by the overheads. So by removing all this information here, I'm really freeing up some space in my mix. Okay, so let's just listen to what that sounds like. I'm going to bring this up. Actually, it would help to have a, a hi-hat. There we go. Now it sounds pretty tingy, correct? So that's okay. It's literally just, I'm treating this almost like a room mic. And what we're doing is just basically giving the overheads a little bit of help with even a dirty sound to make it sound kind of electric. So if you put it all together, sounds pretty good. Let's call up our mixer again. Bass drum's hitting a little hard. Now, one other thing I'd like to show you about the bass drum. So now that we've kind of heard what this sounds like, let's check out maybe a thicker part. Where's my pre-chorus? Coming up. Here we go. 2, 3, 4. So there's your toms. So if you listen to the toms, they are taking a little bit away from the bass drum. So I'd like to increase the bass drum attack just a little bit. So I'm going to do that using a plugin called Kilo Hearts. This is just a simple transient shaper. There's a lot of free ones out there. I'm going to leave this in mono, and I'm just going to increase the attack. And I'm going to do it kind of drastically just so you can see what it does. You can just hear that bass drum attacking everything. I've had really good success leaving this below 20% and just helping it subtly out. A lot of these moves and choices that we're making are very subtle. So that's what's important. So this is called a transient shaper. You can Google them. There is a couple free ones out there. Okay, now one other thing. We got to check our levels here. I thought I saw, oh, yeah, okay. I thought I saw like a huge peak, but that was when we were messing with the transient shaper. Our snare's not cutting through completely. I'm not liking this verb as much as I did earlier. There we go. Okay, so these snares need to come up. Now, we're hitting a problem with our metering. So we're starting to clip here, particularly on the snare. That's going to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring everything down using a gain plugin. And this is just a stock Logic gain plugin. The way to get to it is you just go to Utility, Gain, Mono. This comes up. And what we're going to do, whoop, don't want to go that far. Let's just take about 7, let's go 8 dB out. And now, to extend this across, all I'm going to do is hit Command Option on my keyboard, hold that down, and now I'm just simply dragging the plugin from one track to the next. Okay, now that's going to bring everything way down, and now we're good to go again. So we're not hitting when we get to the mix bus stage, we're not hitting our mix bus so hard. This will give me a little bit more room to bring up my snares too. Okay, so let's check a different part of the song. Let's let it go through. Here we go. We'll bring my overheads up. I want to hear those cymbals just a little bit more. Bass drum's hitting a little hard. Okay, cool. So we're kind of sitting in a pretty good spot here. So what I'm going to do is now we're going to bus this over. Everybody who talks about, bussing. So we're going to basically create a drum bus so that everything is controlled on one fader. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to my outputs, right, which is right here, my stereo outs, right click one of them. And now let's just make, say, bus 20. It doesn't matter, whatever's open. Now what's cool about Logic, just like it did the VCA, it creates a bus. And you can see all my other buses here. I got like my bass bus. This was for the other, like the fake drums that I had written the song with. And then you got acoustic guitar, verb, percussion, synths, all that stuff. So now we have bus 20. Remember we made bus 20 with our drums right here. There's bus 20. I'm going to label it really quickly. So let's just call this real drums. Cool. All right. And you can make this whatever color by hitting Option C, and then you have your color up. So let's just make this orange. I usually do drums in orange. Okay. So now I'm going to go one more time to our good friend Slate Digital, and we're going to do some bus processing on this. And you can use a lot of different things. Logic has some good stock ones, so check it out. Use the presets, and then go from there. We're just sticking with presets today because they're quick. Okay, so they have drum bus big vintage, polished, thick, tight, and punchy. I like to start with thick. It's always worked pretty well with these drums. And by the way, the drums this recorded on was a Mapex Pro M. They were pretty famous or widely used in the early 2000s. When I got home from Iraq, it was like the first thing I bought for myself with some of my deployment money. Okay, so let's take a listen with it off first, and then we'll listen to it with it on. So you can hear it brings everything forward just a little bit. This is with it on. Off. On. It's subtle, but it works really, really well. We could try a couple other ones just real quick. Let's listen to what drum bus tight and punchy sounds like. So that's on. That's with the compressor engaged. All right, let's take it back to, let's try big and vintage. Pretty good, pretty good. It's not what the thick is doing for these drums though. You got to also pay attention to what it's doing to your drums themselves. Like the bass drum got brought up, so I'm actually gonna just lower it a little bit. Oops, I have my VCA. Why am I doing that? Okay. Okay, so that's not sounded bad. The last thing that I like to do here is there's a couple different versions of this. I like to add tape emulation because that just makes it sound like a recording to me. And again, this is all taste, but it brings out a lot of subtle things. It smooths out some more negative frequencies or less ear-pleasing frequencies. So there's a couple different ones. Waves has one called Kramer Tape, which is really, really cool. I'll come down here. I'll show you what that one looks like. And again, this is going to be stereo because now sound is coming at you from all multiple angles. It's no longer a mono source. Mono just means basically you got one source in one spot. Stereo meaning you got multiple sources coming from multiple spots. That's how I like to think of it. Okay, so they got a really nice preset list as well. So you have like your full drum kit. You can put these actually on like different things like kick. I wonder, like, these nasty snares probably sound pretty cool. But let's take a listen to what Kramer sounds like. Okay, so this is with it off. And here comes on. That's on. So it's adding a little bit of depth. I like it a lot. It is cool. However, I like to use there's also one by Isotope right here. It's a vintage tape. We won't get into that one. So let's check out the Slate Digital version of this. it's just bringing out so much subtlety, and like that bass just starts to hit that bass drum. Let's go to the pre-chorus real quick and check this. And again, every change I'm making to the overall bus is, changing something subtly in here, how they're interacting together. So that's why you see me coming back and, I added a little bit more toms there. So don't be afraid to change things. Okay. Sounded pretty good. Cool. Now, let's listen to what it sounds like with the song. So let's go to the chorus real quick. It's always good to check a chorus, like the louder parts. That's very nice. Let's check it with the floor tom part, and the rack tom. So yeah, there you really have it. It's a quick down and dirty way to mix drums. It is going to take some time, but a couple pointers with drums. Make sure that you edit this stuff before you get into this mixing, so you actually know like what you are working with. Because if you haven't made your editing choices yet, or your comp choices yet, you haven't really, got the drums to a place performance-wise where they need to be able to make correct decisions in the mix. So that's just how I mix drums using the Console One and using Slate Digital Plugins. I'm going to make a bunch of extra or other videos. So if you guys have any suggestions, any things you'd like me to go over, please feel free to comment, hit me up. I would love to make videos for you guys. Anyway, this is Mike signing out. I'll catch you next time.